Coming out, we got our buddy Dave DeSantis from TTR Sotheby's International Realty joining us. So it's going to be a fun conversation. David is the co-chief operating officer of one of the leading, if not the leading, luxury brokerage in the region. They've done so much expansion over the last couple of years. It's just really an impressive operation. So we want to talk about that and get into Dave's story personally. Want to discuss his journey from government transitioning into real estate, luxury deal making strategies, some of his record-breaking sales, and some of his market insights. I don't know if you guys have paid attention. It's a little wonky out there. So very much looking forward to the conversation and can't wait to kick it off. And just as a reminder, later tonight, we are going to be recording a movie review on The Departed. So be on the lookout for that this weekend. We just wrapped an episode, then we just launched last night with Sean and Jen Degnan, owners of iTrip Annapolis. So if you have any interest in learning a little bit more about short-term rentals and their backstory, it was a really fun conversation. I'm very glad that they were able to join us. And last week, we had a couple of different reviews. We reviewed Man on Fire for our movie podcast, The Night Shift. And we had some great conversations with Ryan Brazel of Rosso Commercial. We had Jamison Mullen of USA Mortgage on, and Justin Santini of the House Cats and Innovative Home Design. So a lot of good content out there, and we appreciate you guys. Make sure you follow, subscribe, hit that bell, leave a review if you can. All that stuff really helps us out, and we're looking forward to more conversations in the future. All right. Thanks, guys. Hope you enjoy the episode. David, welcome, man. I appreciate you joining.
So allowed to drink my coffee during this, right?
Yeah, dude, you drink up, man. Drink up. I've got my Celsius here. The problem with 3 kids is that they constantly get in the way of sleep, which is a problem, and any kind of relaxation. So caffeine is my friend.
There's so much work involved.
It's a problem. And I knew it, but it's like most things in life. You know it and you have a feeling of it, but until you actually do it, you're like, Jesus Christ.
You're rolling through it. It'll be fine.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I'm getting gray hairs now, so that's good. So give me a you've been, how long have you been in this COO role for TTR?
Well, I think it sort of depends on whether you mean officially or unofficially. I mean, I've been at TTR for almost 20 years now. Yeah. And really, since the beginning, I have played kind of a management role. I didn't have the COO title, but as you know, TTR Sotheby's has grown exponentially over the last 2 decades. And we didn't have titles. We didn't have specific leadership roles. There are 5 of us that own the firm, and we all pitched in. And it wasn't really until a couple years ago that we made specific roles for each of the partners. And that's when I became COO. So I guess it's been about 2 years.
Yeah. Well, you were managing the Bethesda. I mean, God, you've probably been managing a bunch of different offices throughout that time. What was it like when you guys started out TTR? So you came on board in 2007?
Yes, 2007. So, I tell this story a lot, right? So Michael Rankin, who's one of our founders, and I have been good friends since we were about 22, 23 years old. So I've known him a long time, even before I was in real estate. And when TTR, which used to be called Taylor and Rankin, which was the reason why it's now called TTR Sotheby's, got the Sotheby's affiliation in 2006. I had not yet joined the firm. But I remember Michael was very proud and happy, and he told me, and I remember going home and saying at home, like, oh, geez, they've spent all this money on a Sotheby's franchise, and it's still never going to be anything but this little boutique brokerage in DuPont Circle, DC. I'm glad to say I was wrong. But yeah, so I joined the following year in 2007. And I think at the time we had one office. There were probably around 30 agents, maybe 40 agents. But it was a small firm. We were selling maybe $300 million of real estate a year.
Yeah, that's pretty good even for the time.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, it was, it was a quality firm. There were good agents, but it was just a very boutique brokerage. So, fast forward to now, we're 500 agents and $5 billion in sales a year. And the goal is to get to 10. So we'll get there.
How many offices are at TTR right now?
We have 12 offices, so we're, throughout the DMV. Our furthest office west would be the Plains, Virginia, out in Hunt Country. Yep. And as you know, we have offices now in Annapolis, and then also on the Eastern Shore in Easton and St. Michael's, Maryland.
Yeah,
and
you guys have had a hell of a run. And you got some awesome agents. I always love working with the Sotheby's agents. They're just buttoned up, polished. And as you know, in real estate, you don't always get that.
No. Yeah, it's true. Well, as you know, I mean, I came from a non-real estate background. And even when I got into real estate, I was originally in commercial real estate. So it was much more kind of an office, a typical office environment, right? And I worked for a very buttoned up firm. At the time, it was called the Charles E. Smith Companies. People now know it as JBG Smith. Yeah. It's changed a lot over the years, but back then we were very much a blue suit, white shirt company, right? It was a very buttoned up organization, and so that's kind of that's where I came from. It's certainly hard to, you can't make real estate agents behave like that on a daily basis. But I do believe that it benefits all of us to have a higher level of professionalism in this business, right? I think we are our worst enemy, right? There are so many people in the real estate profession who don't treat it like a profession. Don't take it seriously. They're sloppy. They could get away with a lot of things just because you can. But if you really want to succeed at this business, as you know, I mean, you're a perfect example of that. You got to treat it like a business. So that's the expectation that we have for our agents at TTR.
What made you want to get into real estate? I'm assuming, like most people, you didn't grow up thinking, you know what I want to do? I want to sell.
Yeah, I don't know. Did I want to get into real estate? Good question. So, originally, I got a degree in public policy, and I worked on Capitol Hill and ultimately in the White House in the Clinton administration. And I thought that was going to be my life, right? That's what I was interested in. I was one of those nerds in school who ran for class office and, boys state and wrote fake legislation and all that. And I thought it was fantastic stuff. But after about not quite a decade of that, I just realized that it wasn't the career for me. I didn't feel like I was in control of my own destiny. And politics was getting nasty. I mean, of course, now it's really nasty, but
now it's worse.
But that was the beginning, right? It was a point where I thought, this doesn't seem like a career that's going to be productive to me. And so, admittedly, my time in the Clinton administration was amazing. I learned a lot. I worked at the Federal Trade Commission. I was chief of staff at the Federal Trade Commission, which was an amazing experience for for a 29-year-old. I really had no business having that job, right? But politics, there you go. And so when the Clinton's second term ended, I just thought, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I started asking friends, and a good friend at the time, who is actually now one of our agents, Matt McCormick, who I think you've met, was working in commercial real estate, and said, you're a high skilled guy, you're a good negotiator. You should just come here and interview with our CEO. And if he likes you, maybe there's something here that would be a good fit for you. And at the time I thought, well, that's as good as anything, right? I don't know what I want to do with the rest of my life. So I did. I went and interviewed, and I got a job. And that was a great experience. I learned a lot about the multifamily world and real estate investing and acquisitions. And it was a terrific experience. And ultimately that the Smith companies were acquired by another firm. And they wanted us to move to Denver, and I didn't want to move to Denver. I'm like, okay, got to do something else. Then I went to the company that is now Hoffman and Associates, which is very large mixed use developer in Washington, D.C. and now other markets. And they brought me on as their head of sales and marketing. So that's really when I got into direct real estate sales. That's when I got my license and was working with real estate agents, but I was on the developer side. So I was really seeing it from the other side of the equation. Great company, great experience. Spent about 4 years there, and then the Great Recession of 2008 started percolating. Even before the recession hit in 2008, it was very clear that the condo market had already dried up. So in 2007, it was obvious to me that Hoffman and Associates was going to really not have any work for several years. Yeah. And I thought, well, okay, it's time to hold the ripcord before they politely ask me to leave. Yeah. And ended up going to TTR, and, Michael Rankin and Jonathan Taylor said, look, just hang your license here until you figure out what you want to do with the rest of your life. And that was 18 years ago now. So I guess this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life.
Well, doing it well. So
I'm trying to get another job at this point.
Yeah, it's too late at this point. Now you're stuck. What is it about DC? Obviously, the political scene is what drew you there, but that's not, that's not where you started. You haven't been in DC forever, have you?
No, I grew up in upstate New York, so I grew up there. I went to college up there. So of course the draw originally for DC was politics, but I think what keeps me in the Mid-Atlantic is, really is a beautiful area. It's a beautiful city. It's a beautiful region. We have access to everything. It's easy to go somewhere else if you want to, because we're centrally located, but you've got the water, you've got the mountains. It's a very green city. It's a very livable city. So it's just been a great place to live and to do business. And, of course, the fact that we are the seat of the federal government has insulated us from a lot of the bigger economic shocks, as you know. I mean, the market is, even in a downturn, the DC real estate market is more stable than other major markets. We'll see if that continues. It's certainly living in interesting times.
Yes, we are.
But yeah, it's been a great place. And I think that I do own a house now in California in the desert in Rancho Mirage, which is actually where I am right now.
Hell yeah. Let's go.
And I think that ultimately this will be where I retire, but that's some years in the distance.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to turn away sunshine all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. 350 days a year of sun is pretty compelling from that.
That's pretty awesome. What do you think some of the biggest takeaways from the public service phase have helped you succeed in real estate? Is there anything that you can take away from that?
Well, I do very much believe in, I'm a believer in positive energy and karma, right? I think it's important to give back. I think the people who are most successful in business are people who are mindful that every interaction is, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, right? I think a lot of times in our business, in a lot of sales businesses, people think, okay, I've got to win, which means the other guy has to lose. And I really don't believe that. I think that, to me, it's important that everybody feels like they were treated fairly. I love to see transactions in which everybody's happy, right? The buyer, the seller, the agents on both sides. That's really what you should aspire to. And I think that it is partly just the way I was raised, but I think it was also my philosophy when I worked on the Hill in the White House, right? That, you're always going to negotiate and people are never going to agree completely, but you want to get to a place where people feel like, you know what, I was willing to give up a little to get whatever it was that my ultimate goal was. So that's the way I approach transactions when I sell real estate, which I still do. But it's also the way that I manage the company. Either, our agents or dealing with people outside the company. I just think positive energy goes a long way, right?
Totally agree. That's one of the staples of the ninja selling stuff. Exactly. Is, don't take a scarcity mindset. There isn't actually enough to go around. It might not always feel like it, but stay positive with stuff. That's a huge thing.
Truly.
You guys focus not exclusively, but primarily on luxury real estate. And that's not necessarily all about price, because sometimes we get these luxury price points that, the house might need work, but the location is exclusive, or, the relationship that you have with the client is, this is one of many in a large portfolio. How do ultra net worth buyers approach real estate?
Interesting question. At the end of the day, I think high net worth individuals have the same pushes and pulls in a real estate transaction that we all do, right? Sometimes I think people would be surprised that, you work with a senior partner at a law firm or a CEO or another senior executive, and you think, these people are the masters of the universe, right? They must be they're used to negotiation. They're used to big financial transactions, but residential real estate has such an emotional component to it, right? You're buying a house to live in. This is your home. There's a lot more than just sticks and bricks. And so I think it has been surprising to me sometimes how nervous or on edge people can be, even when you think, wow, that guy's a real baller. I can't believe he's getting so wound around the axle about a home purchase. But we're all the same, right? we've got to live somewhere. We all feel the same thing. And so I think our philosophy really is, I don't care whether you're buying your first home for $300,000 or you're buying a $30 million house. we have to treat you with respect, intelligence. We've got to give you all the information you need. It's that high net worth individuals are just like everybody else, right? It's just the numbers are bigger.
The numbers are bigger. Yeah.
And the way to really succeed in this business is to, whether they are a first-time buyer or somebody who has purchased homes all over the world, is you've got to do your homework. You absolutely need to make sure that when they finish that transaction, that they're not going to think of anybody else but you and your firm going forward. Because that's how this business succeeds, is referral.
Right.
As you well know, I mean, you've been in the business long enough. You've got clients that are coming back for their second or third bite at the apple. That's what we love to see. The deals are bigger. Sometimes they're more complex at TTR, but we really do business across the spectrum, right? I mean, we certainly dominate the high end of the market, but fully 50% of our business is transactions under $1 million. So, and I think people don't always realize that. Sometimes I hear from our agents that they'll speak to a friend about selling their property, and the person will say, "Oh, well, I didn't think that you would want to work with me because I'm not quote unquote Sotheby's material." I don't really know what that means, right? To me, as you suggested, it's not just luxury is not just a price point. It's a level of quality and service. And I think every client deserves that. I don't care what their property costs. They all deserve that level of service.
So I totally agree on that. And the DC market is a little bit different than kind of our, suburban market out here. You guys do get international clients that come in, and I'm sure there's a whole gambit of stuff that you got to consider with that. There's probably 3 other big international markets: New York, LA, Miami. How does Washington differ from those markets?
Well, I mean, of course, at the end of the day, Washington is a much smaller city than New York, LA, or Miami, right? It just is. So we don't have quite the volume of those high ticket sales. And I think, although this is changing a little bit recently, and we can touch on that, but I feel like people in Washington, D.C., even wealthy individuals, are a little different in the way they consume real estate than the other markets you mentioned, which is to say, in my experience, wealthy people in Washington, D.C. really don't want to display their wealth in the same way that people do in New York and Miami and LA. I mean, we have a lot of very wealthy clients who live in what, in other markets would be considered very modest homes. People in DC are not flashy. We certainly sell very expensive property, but compared to what you see in those other markets, it really is a very different thing. Now, that is changing a little bit now, I have to say. People have certainly read in the paper about the quote unquote Trump bump, and either people who in his administration, who are admittedly very wealthy people, who have come in from New York and other cities and are used to consuming real estate in a way that is very different than the way we consume real estate. And so those folks have come in and purchased some of the most expensive property we have to sell in Washington, D.C. And I'm very pleased to say that we did the bulk of those transactions. I mean, almost every single one. And I think that, and it's not just people in the administration, right? I think it is now public that Mark Zuckerberg, has acquired a house in Washington, D.C. I think people are feeling the need right now to have proximity to the federal government, to the administration. And so that has changed the dynamic of the DC luxury market quite a bit. Will that be permanent? I don't know. I mean, certainly there's a limit to how many huge houses we can build, because there just aren't that many places to build them anymore. Right. And as you know, we have development restrictions. We have height restrictions in Washington, D.C. You're never going to see a building, a super tall condo in Washington, D.C. with triplex units selling for $100 million. It's just never going to happen because we're just a different animal. But it certainly has been exciting to see some of the level of these big sales recently.
Do you think that's probably the biggest luxury trend from a market dynamic standpoint? Is the people coming in that want influence on the administration?
I think it is. I think it is right now. Like I said, we'll see if that continues. Everything is in flux right now. I mean, on one hand, the administration has said that they would like to see Washington, D.C. be a showcase for the world, that they want the city to be clean and beautiful and crime-free, and I think we can all get behind those things. But on the other hand, they're closing down federal agencies, people are getting laid off. So I'm not sure that those two goals necessarily are in unison. We'll see what happens. But Washington, D.C. is, for all intents and purposes, my hometown, right? At this point, I'm a local. I want to see this city succeed. And I really hope that it continues to be a place where, frankly, wealthy people and not wealthy people can live and enjoy a wonderful city. But from my perspective as somebody who owns a luxury brokerage, yeah, absolutely. I want to see us continue to be a place where people are wanting to relocate and wanting to spend a lot of money on property.
Yeah, it'd be nice. You've been in, whether personally or attached to it, through the brokerage, you've been behind some of the region's most impressive deals, especially in recent memory. But what are some of the most fun ones that you've been a part of? You've got a historic presidential retreat, the Herbert Hoover Mountain Estate. You guys have done a friary on the Severn, which is really cool. Luxury condos in the Lauren. I mean, there's just, I could go on and on, but do you have any deals that stick out to you as something that you're really proud of?
Well, going back to what I said earlier, I'm really proud of every deal where everybody feels happy. But you mentioned the Herbert Hoover fishing retreat. That was really a fascinating property. It's located in the Catoctin Mountains, north of Frederick, Maryland, and it was the original Camp David before Camp David became a thing. And it's located very, very close by to that place. And it's a beautiful property. I mean, all of these historic cabins on a trout stream, and it was a tough sale because it was just hard to figure out who is going to want this thing.
Right.
And ultimately, I mean, it's public information now. It was acquired by the Church of Scientology, which was a yes. They bought it as a retreat, and it really was a fascinating experience because I got a call from an attorney, didn't say who his client was, wouldn't say who his client was. We now know why, right? I think it would have changed the dynamic somewhat. But so he was in LA and he said, got a client who saw your listing online. They're very interested. We'd like to tour the property. He said, sure. We set it up, and I drove up there, and this bus pulled up, kind of one of those 20-person buses.
Yeah.
And all these people get out. They're all in suits, men and women, very serious, no niceties at all. Just very matter of fact, right? Clipboards, they're all taking notes. I really have no idea what's going on here. They didn't tell me, I was like, okay, who exactly is the purchaser here? Or is it a committee? I wasn't really sure what was going on. Spent hours poring over the place, up, down, looking in every building, examining the property. And we had a couple of those visits. And again, at this point, I still didn't entirely know who it was, although, of course, I researched the attorney, and it ultimately turned out that his only client was the Church of Scientology. Okay, well, guess we know who we're dealing with now. Yeah. And he would call me or leave me emails at all hours of the day and night. And I remember one time, I mentioned to him, I said, it's funny to me that, you seem to be a real night owl. Like you're calling me and leaving me messages at 4 a.m. LA time. And he just kind of chuckled and said, yes, that's right. And it's like, okay. Maybe
some weird people in this business.
Those electrodes that, I don't know what he would do. But it really was a fascinating deal. Now, ultimately, I'm not sure the people in Thurmont, Maryland, where the property is located, were super excited about the fact that the Church of Scientology was buying a historic retreat. But interestingly enough, the church is one of the biggest owners of historic properties in the United States. They actually make a point of when they are in specific markets, they like to acquire historic properties. I really don't know the dynamics of that and why that's important to them. But if you look at the other properties that they own in different cities around the United States, and frankly, in places around the world, they own some really remarkable properties. And so it's, it was an interesting deal to do.
Who would have thought, man? I guess you really never know where your buyer's going to come from. So that's incredible.
Well, you don't. And you know this because you're familiar with our firm. We get lots of calls from all over the world. A lot of interesting people. Many times we don't know anything about them. That's by design. Sometimes they're represented by attorneys or fiduciaries. And so it certainly changes the dynamic of the transaction when you're not with the buyer, opening the door and guiding them through the property. It feels a little bit more impersonal, but it's part of what we do. So you make the best of it, and hopefully you impress the fiduciary enough that they go back and report to the client positively. But it does make for a little bit of a strange dynamic sometimes.
Do you think that one was the most challenging deal that you've had?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I'm sure that the most challenging deal I have is probably some $300,000 property where everything went sideways and the buyer and seller hated each other. And, like we talked about before, it has absolutely nothing to do with the price point. It has everything to do with the people involved and the dynamics of the situation. I mean, we've all had transactions where everything seemed to be going along fine, and a week before settlement, the basement floods or some other calamity befalls you. Those are the difficult ones, right? It's hard to get people. Obviously, they're nervous; they feel bad. And so those are the tough ones. I mean, I'm not really scared by whether it's 20 million or 2 million or 250,000. It's really just the dynamics of the situation.
Yeah. Well, you guys have, if not at least most of the record-breaking sales in the DMV.
Yeah, certainly in the last several years, right? I mean, I think that over the last 5 years, we have pulled ahead of the firm that we have competed with historically, which was Washington Fine Properties. And they are a very fine firm. And as I will tell anybody who listens, much of what we know about selling luxury real estate, we learned from Washington Fine Properties. But we have grown. We have kind of gone beyond them. And I think that now, in the last several years, we're at a point where everything over $5 million is really, for the most part, a TTR sale.
Yeah. Oh, it's impressive, man. I always love watching the, Washington Business Journal articles on, the Bezos has bought this, or the, Snyder, somebody sold his house finally, get him out of here. It's always fun to watch those, and there's always TTR attached to it in some way.
That is true.
Which is very cool.
We're grateful for that, right? I think certainly part of that is the brand, right? It's hard to argue. I mean, people all over the world know the Sotheby's name. It's been around 300 years, and it's always been associated with quality and luxury. So that, I think, gives us a leg up. But we have great agents. Again, it goes back to treating this like a profession, which it is, right? I mean,
exactly.
When if you're having surgery, you do your research and you find the best surgeon. If you're in a sticky legal situation, you're going to do your research and find the best attorney to represent you. And so I think that's what we aspire to as a real estate brokerage. We want to be the go-to people. And again, regardless of price point, we want to be the people you go to for important transactions in your life.
Yeah. Well, you guys have made a friggin' name for yourself, man. It's incredible to watch. It's so impressive. I love following it.
Thank you. Well, see what happens, right? Stay tuned.
Exactly. Let's talk a little bit more about, nobody has a crystal ball, but if anybody's going to have a pulse on where the market's heading, I would think that it's going to be somebody like yourself. And DC is evolving pretty rapidly, but DC is always kind of transforming one way or another, just by nature of having different administrations in all the time, certainly more frequently than other markets do. How do you think some of these government shifts and policies are going to shape things in the near term?
Well, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned about it, right? I'm a hopeful person by nature, but I feel like a lot of what is going on right now is happening very fast and sometimes without a huge amount of forethought. And I just hope that the DC economy is not mortally wounded. Ultimately, this, I presume, will continue to be the seat of government. And so it's always going to be an important city and an important market. But there certainly is the potential in the short term for some downturn, for a shift in the market, for higher inventory, because people are leaving, because they're losing their job, or agencies are moving out. But I think it's too early to tell, frankly. The spring market so far has actually been quite robust. I mean, our numbers are up from last year, which is great. But I think what's really going to be telling is what happens in Q3 and Q4 of this year. Right. Are we going to sink into recession, or are we going to avoid it? How much are these job cuts going to impact the market? I don't think we're going to know that until later in the year. Certainly, it's not going to directly impact quote unquote luxury market as much as it will the suburban market. Because if you look at, for example, the people who are being displaced from federal jobs, the vast majority of them, to the extent that they're even in DC, I mean, a lot of these jobs, I think people are not aware, are located in other cities, right? I mean, there are people losing federal jobs in cities all over the country, and that's going to be impactful. But to the extent that they affect us in Washington, D.C., it's really the outer ring, right? Actually, places like Annapolis and Severna Park and other suburban Maryland towns. So we're going to have to watch that. I don't think it's really going to directly impact people that are buying $5 million houses in Washington, D.C., but there will be a trickle down effect. I mean, as government contracts get cut, people who are senior executives at government contracting firms will be affected. That will affect our business. Attorneys and law firms will be affected. So we're just going to have to watch it very carefully. Right now, I would say we're in a wait and see mode. But we haven't had a market downturn, as you know, for a long time in the DC area. I mean, everybody thought that the COVID pandemic was going to be a disaster, and it turned out to be the craziest real estate market that any of us have ever seen, right? Because everybody decided, well, if I'm going to be home all day, got to have a bigger house, or I'm going to buy a house out in the country. So our business skyrocketed. It was nuts. So that's a perfect example of where something that you think is going to impact the real estate market in a really negative way actually had the opposite effect. Yeah. What will happen this time? Your guess, good as mine.
It's I mean, we're used to like one story a week. I feel like there's 10 a day now. So
exactly.
It's impossible to keep up with it. Have you guys seen a rise in some of these branded luxury residences or developers starting new projects?
Yeah, not as much in DC as you'd see in other markets, right? For a lot of the reasons that we talked about earlier, that DC is still a city where people tend to be a little quieter about their real estate purchases. So it's not as important for somebody to live in a Ritz-Carlton residence or a Four Seasons residence or one of these other branded opportunities, but they are popping up. I mean, we of course have had Ritz-Carlton residences for many years. There's a new one in Chevy Chase, Maryland. We now have the Four Seasons residences under construction in Georgetown. And frankly, the prices are pretty breathtaking, right? I mean, condos in that building are selling for $3,000 a square foot, which is a number that we have never seen in DC. Never. I think that if you look at the highest prices per square foot of condo product in the DC market, we've never hit 2,000 a square foot before. You're usually talking about 1,500 a foot, 1,700 a foot, which in and of itself is crazy expensive. But these numbers are really breathtaking. And so it's interesting. It will be interesting to me to see what the consumer reaction to that is. We are not selling that property. Interestingly enough, they have an inside sales team, but of course, we have been invited to look under the hood and see what the product is like. And it really is going to be an incredible product, but will enough people in DC want to buy it? I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Where are the developers coming from? Are they local, or are they coming from New York, or?
It's a combination. A lot of times it's a team from everywhere. They'll have a local component. Typically the finance people are from somewhere else. I mean, I think that particularly for those high-end projects, it tends to be people that are building them in lots of different markets. And so they're dipping their toe in the water. I mean, we certainly have our own homegrown high-end developers. I mean, Hoffman and Associates, who I used to work for, built Amaris at the DC Wharf, and those numbers were very high, and it's a beautiful product. So we have East Bank, the Lanier family. They have always been building high-end product in Washington, D.C. and the area. So it's a combination, but and I think that they're, of course, because they're local, they're perhaps a little bit more in tune with our customers.
Right.
Sometimes I think when people come from other markets, it's hard for them to know what's going to work with DC consumers, because we are a little different. We're not as flashy as Miami or New York. And so you've got to build a different product, and you've got to approach those people in a different way. It's a different sales pitch.
Do you think that you're going to see some of these vacant government buildings either get sold off and converted into condos or redeveloped into something else?
Well, I think that's a trend that's happening everywhere, right? This office residential conversion, and DC is really ripe for that. I mean, even before this, before the current administration came in and this kind of realignment of federal agencies and the federal workforce, DC was a very over-officed city, right? If you look at the core of DC, it's very different than New York or Miami. There really isn't a lot of residential in the central core of DC. It's federal buildings, it's office buildings. And to a certain extent, that has negatively impacted the quality of life, right? For years and years, you go to certain neighborhoods in downtown DC, and if it's not a big tourist season, there's nobody around after 7 o'clock at night. I don't think that's a good thing, right? I think you want a healthy mix. I would love to see some of these there's some beautiful federal buildings that, frankly, if they don't need them, I think it would be great if they could convert to housing. But those buildings are all a challenge, right? They're big buildings. They have big floor plates. There's lots of offices in there where it wasn't important to have light and air. You think about the story of government workers toiling away in windowless office.
It's a bunch of severance offices.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to convert those buildings. I mean, some of them would really be beautiful from a perspective of what the facades look like. Could you make livable residential units? I don't know. We'll have to see. It's expensive. But you know what's more expensive than converting them is leaving empty buildings to just fester in your downtown.
Exactly.
We have to do something with them, right? So if the federal government doesn't need them and companies don't need them for offices, we have to convert them. And to their credit, the DC government is doing what it can to offer incentives, tax and otherwise, to encourage the conversion of those buildings. But it's expensive, and capital is expensive right now. I mean, we're just not in a place where the private market can affordably invest in the conversion of those buildings. I hope that will change. Everything does change over time. That eventually that it will become cheaper to do that as we get better at it, but it does need to happen.
Yeah. Well, what are you guys seeing in DC and some of the surrounding markets for what buyers are prioritizing right now? During COVID, it was like, give us a home office, give us some kind of amenities. I want a pool. I want space. I feel like that might be shifting a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's pulled back a little. I mean, obviously, at the same time we're laying off federal workers, we're also telling the other workers that they need to be in the office 5 days a week as opposed to working from home, right? So I think we are going to see a little bit of change that people won't necessarily want the house in the suburbs with a 2-acre lot. Maybe they're moving closer in, which means that it's going to change the housing product that they're going to buy. So that's one dynamic. I think the other thing, and you know this because we've seen this, really this is a trend over the last decade, which is buyers really are shying away from a project, right? I mean, I remember when I first got into real estate and DC was going through its renaissance, people would buy anything, right? I don't care how crappy it was, how much work needed to be done. They're like, okay, let me at it. I'm going to buy this house. We're going to fix it up. It's going to be great. I was one of those people, right? I mean, I bought a little old lady house that hadn't been touched in decades and we had to redo everything. People don't want that now. They literally want to move into a home that is ready to roll. They want to bring their suitcases and their toothbrush and not have to do a thing. And that, I mean, that's fine. But it absolutely impacts the way we sell real estate because I find that we have to have a lot more conversations with our sellers about what they need to do to get that house ready to sell if they want to get top dollar. Right. You know, I mean, people are typically very proud of their homes and everybody sort of has a different expectation about what a beautiful home is. And so we've all had those difficult conversations with our sellers about, look, I know you've lived in this home for 40 years and you love it, but the reality is that, you know, your orange paint and your 1970s bathroom fixtures are not going to cut it here.
No.
You know, the house will sell, but you're not going to get the same price that your neighbor down the street got who renovated their house 2 years ago.
Exactly.
And it's, I don't know, it's interesting to me, right? Because as a real estate consumer myself, maybe it's because I'm in the business, I'm not shy about that, right? I'm looking at location and sort of the quality of the structure. If there are things that need to be changed, I'll change them because I want what I want. But a lot of consumers these days are just not like that. They really don't want to have to think about what to do to fix their home up. And that makes it hard for us, right? Because it's hard to know what's going to appeal to someone, frankly. Right. And it's also made, and this to me is kind of a disappointing thing. It's made a lot of housing product somewhat generic, right? Which is if you have to guess what consumers want, it all ends up looking the same, right? I mean, we all go into houses that like flips and houses that have been renovated, and it's the same bathroom fixtures. It's the same gray paint. It's the same, design scheme. And after a while, you're like, gosh, I don't even know what house I'm in anymore. I've seen 7 houses today that all look exactly alike inside.
Yes.
To me, that's not necessarily a great thing, right? I think your home is a reflection of you and your personality, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think we all want our house to look exactly like the house down the street. But that's kind of what we have to do in order to get across the finish line. So,
yeah, I totally agree. And I think part of that is looking at, there's a few different dynamics in play. I mean, a lot of the buyers that are in that purchase phase are in their prime earning years too. So they don't really have time to do these renovations. Right. They don't have some of them don't have the connections to do it. The cost of doing renovations has gone up since COVID. It's just,
absolutely.
It's just not, it's not as feasible as it once was to do that. Not to mention, most people around my age or even a little bit older are not handy at all. I mean, they can barely screw a light bulb.
Very few people are these days, right? I mean, you see those shows on HGTV where the happy couple goes in and does their own demo, and there they are, doing plumbing and electrical work. And who are these people? Because
who are these people?
I don't know anything like that.
They're also the same people that are like, hey, we're looking for this house and we have a $2 million budget. I am a yarn spinner and my husband herds cats.
Yeah. Exactly.
Wait, what?
Good luck.
Exactly. What kind of advice would you have for agents that are looking to break into the luxury space?
Well, I think it's hard to, and I get that question a lot, right? Even from within our agents at TTR. I mean, people that are newer to the business, they're like, okay, how do I raise my average price point to 3 million? It's like, well, you're not going to wave a wand, right?
You have to get some better friends.
I get. Well, but look, it goes back to what I said earlier, which is the people who are really successful in this business are people who have clients for a lifetime, right?
Right.
We start out in the business, we're young, our clients are young, they're buying their first homes. 8 years later, they move up, higher price point. 10 years after that, or 15 years after that, kids are gone. Maybe they're, moving out of the house, buying a luxury condo. The way you break into the luxury business, unfortunately, there's no magic to it, right? It really is about growing with your client base. Now, I know that at our brokerage, we certainly try to mentor people. I mean, we encourage senior successful agents to partner with younger agents or people who are newer to the business, to bring them in on higher price listings so that you've got a track record. That's the problem. If you're an agent who is very comfortably selling $500,000 properties, you may well get a listing appointment for a $2.5 million property. But of course, that seller's going to say, how many other $2.5 million properties have you sold? And the answer is 0 or very few. And so I think it's incumbent upon us in management to try to make those partnerships and relationships happen so that at least younger agents can see and be part of those transactions, and then they have it on their resume, right? And that's where you get there. But really, the most organic way to get there is, I'm now working with a client on their 4th transaction, and they've moved up, and so have I. It just takes time.
Yeah, it takes time, and we don't necessarily live in a society that's patient. So I get people that ask, people that are newer in the business will ask me that, and like, well, I've sold luxury. I would not consider myself a luxury agent. I try to treat myself like that and clients like that. But it comes into network. Who is in your network, and do you know your market inside and out? Because if you're not an expert in your market, you're going to be middling for a long time, and there's not really
no question. But again, I think it's also, as I said, DC and the Mid-Atlantic generally. I mean, look, we have a lot of expensive real estate. We have a lot of beautiful real estate, but we're not New York or Miami or LA. And I think a lot of people in our business, real estate agents, see, we don't do ourselves any favor, right? They see shows like $1 Million Listing, and they think, let's talk. Ooh, how do I get that job? A agent driving a Lamborghini, and they go to a restaurant in LA and they're negotiating their deals. The clients are nowhere to be seen, right?
No.
The agents are drinking wine in a fancy restaurant in LA and negotiating a deal. I'm like, where's the client?
Where is the client? Also, the consumer does not know. That's totally staged.
Not like that. That is not real, right? I mean, that's it. How do I get to sell multi-million-dollar properties. Well, I guess you're just going to have to go to New York or LA or Miami. Apparently that's where they all are. I don't.
Exactly. Well, let's do some quick questions before we wrap up. I like to do a little rapid fire section here.
Gotcha.
What's the favorite? Do you have a favorite property that you've ever sold?
Ooh, favorite property I've ever sold. I honestly don't. I'm sorry that's a cop-out answer, but I really do not. I can't think of. I mean, I've sold some wonderful property, but they all had interesting things about them. I mean, we talked about the Hoover Fishing Camp trout run.
Oh yeah.
That was cool. There've been a lot of really interesting properties, but nothing stands out to me as like that was the be all end all. It's just it's a grind.
Yeah. Every day is a grind. I don't think many people realize that. Do you have a dream listing that you'd like to represent one day?
Well, I do have the listing of the Friary in Annapolis that I'm sharing with my colleague Brad Capel. That really is a spectacular home.
That's a wild one, man.
Yeah, we had a great showing this past week. Fingers crossed. It's just a really unique, big, beautiful property with a lot of history. The owners were incredibly thoughtful in what they did to reimagine this historic home. So, that's a real pleasure to list. I mean, it's obviously it's nice to have your name associated with something that is so beautiful and spectacular. There are certainly other really beautiful homes in the Mid-Atlantic that I would love to sell. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. What's a book or movie or podcast that you would recommend to anybody in real estate?
Okay, so when agents come to TTR, I give them two books, right? One is Ninja Selling, which we talked about. I'm a firm believer in the ninja selling philosophy. The other is a book called Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidera. And I mean, you're a Compass agent. I know that Will Guidera is speaking at the next Compass retreat. He actually came to speak at Sotheby's a couple of years ago. So I've seen him and I've read his book. He is an unbelievable, for people who don't know, he's a restaurateur. He was one of the owners of 11 Madison Park in New York, which was for a long time rated the best restaurant in the entire world. And his philosophy of service and of customer service and the way people should be treated, I think it's almost like the Bible to me, right? So in terms of how I think someone really should aspire to have a career in real estate, read that book.
Do you have one piece of advice for people going through negotiations that you think would be helpful for them?
I mean, again, I think it's stay calm, and it's always put yourself in the shoes of the person on the other side of the table, right? I think that the most successful negotiations occur when you can really understand the motivations of the person you're negotiating against. Because you've got to create a win. If you're going to have a successful sale or negotiation or anything, both sides need to feel like they got something. I think there are a lot of people out there who don't see it that way. It's like they want to see like I won and you lost.
Right.
It doesn't work, right? Ultimately, it might work one time, but I think you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the other party.
Well said, man. Well, where can listeners find you if they want your services?
Well, they can look me up on the sotheby'srealty.com. I'm very easy to find. I mean, frankly, there aren't a lot of David DeSantis in the world. So if you Google me, I'm number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm not hard to find from that perspective. Always happy to talk to anybody, clients and agents too, who are interested in getting more information.
Awesome, man. We'll put your contact info in the captions too on this when we release it. So, David, thank you, man. We'll wrap this up. This was awesome. I really appreciate the time and the conversation. This is really good.
No, Shane, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, guys. That's a wrap for our Dave DeSantis episode. Special thanks to him for coming out. That was awesome. Hopefully you guys got a lot of good insight from that. We have few more episodes dropping next week with guests that you guys are going to love. I'll intro them in a few days, and we'll just leave this out there as a little teaser. But appreciate you guys very much. If you like this podcast and want to subscribe to more, please do, and leave a review. Hit the bell. Everything you guys can do to help us grow this is super appreciated. We love you all. Thank you. Until next time. Boom.